staying religiously updated versus the risks, and when automatic updates can bite you in the butt. Can deepfakes be used to benefit privacy, using DNS to combat meta, and our favorite YouTube channels? Welcome to the SR180 Q&A, where we answer questions from our amazing patrons who allow us to make this podcast for all of you. If you enjoy the questions on patreon.com/surveillancepod. And without further ado, let's get into the main question. So this comes from Satellite, and they are a brand new subscriber, so welcome to our Patreon. So thank you for being a longtime listener and really appreciate that. And they bring up a really good point. We're normally very much big proponents of automatic updates from the perspective of getting security updates as fast as possible and making sure that you're on top of those updates, which is a really important part of security. A lot of times updates are patched that might be actively exploited in the wild within 1 or 2 days. And Satellite says, totally agree, but they're pretty much mentioning how it's less common but still annoying cases where a new update sometimes breaks the functionality of something. The main thing they've always found intensely frustrating is when they become an opportunity for big tech companies to either insert features and capabilities that they barely mention, or revert things like privacy, telemetry, opt-out toggles, and after updates. It's pretty much a general thought, but I guess there's some stuff that we can unpack here. First thing I'll say to this, because it's a very valid point, is I actually like to differentiate between feature and security updates. A lot of times there's a way to actually opt in for feature updates or security updates. And you can actually choose that depending on the operating system and just depending on the device and the apps. You can't really do it with apps too often, because if you're getting automatic updates for your applications or your software, there's not too much to customize. But I know for operating systems, a lot of times you can at least see if something's going to be a security update or a feature update. So that's one thing I'll leave you with. But yeah, this is actually kind of a downside, so you have to be careful with this. There are some situations where, especially in like production environments, if stability is something that you need more of and you don't want to maybe be using like bleeding edge stuff, you now have to balance the question of, do I want access to the most up-to-date security, or am I willing to sacrifice stability? And when I say stability, that's not just stability in a sense of something crashing. It's also stability in a sense of features, in a sense of any kind of massive changes or anything like that. If you're somebody who wants things to stay exactly the same, then a lot of times you're going to have to find a way to somehow get the security updates without that, or you're going to be sacrificing your security. So it is a bit of a trade-off. Our main goal here is to keep people safe, and 99+% of the times, automatic updates are the way. That's just the reality. There's going to be the times where, yeah, you're going to get screwed by an update. They're going to introduce a vulnerability through a security update, and the people who updated super early were caught in that. Those happen, but they happen a lot less frequently than security patches, which is found in almost every security update out there. Those are kind of my loose thoughts, but it is something that's really tough to grapple with, and it's always something for people to think about. But for most people, everyone I know in my life, security updates, automatic updates are almost always a better thing than having someone run consistently old software that's being actively exploited.
All really good points. I have a lot of thoughts here. I mean, I think threat modeling is a big one. Every few months, I kind of check my settings just to kind of see, is there anything new? Is there anything I missed? Is there anything that's reverted? In some cases, you can get lucky. Like Apple has, if you set the parental controls, a lot of those settings won't revert. So I would look for, and I think, I could be wrong, but I think on Windows, things like W10 privacy and O&O shut up, they also typically, or at very least, they'll show you like what settings have reverted. Maybe kind of rely on some tools like that if it fits your threat model. You mentioned this wasn't really a question, more of a talking point, but you are correct. It is a good talking point worth considering. I mean, we just covered this week the whole Rivo thing, and we mentioned on the podcast that like if, people were opted into automatic updates, some people may have had all their 2FA codes wiped out before they even had a chance to react, before they even knew anything. One thing that I have working in my advantage is I'm really dependent on RSS. Because I use RSS so much, I'm subscribed to a lot of blogs and a lot of like GitHub and stuff like that. And if I see an update, I just bookmark it. And I'm like, oh, I want to read that later. And I know, especially for proprietary apps, that's not really a thing. A lot of them are just like, we're constantly fixing bugs and bringing you new features. And it's like, you're useless. Thank you. But if you have that opportunity, that could be one way to try and stay on top of what changes are coming down the road. Mr. Camel999 says, what would be each of your guys' favorite YouTube channels, excluding ones you own or partially own? Number one, bold of you to assume that The New Oil or Surveillance Report are in my favorite YouTube channel lists. Two spring to mind right away. One of them is Joe Scott. He is to science what I am to privacy, in the sense that like I am not an expert, but I'm trying to explain this stuff to people. He is not a scientist. I think he used to be marketing or something. And he literally just does like science YouTube channels, and he does really good research, and he's very open about the fact that like I'm not an expert, but he'll pick interesting topics or like news articles, and he'll try to explain like this happened, there's this theory, there's this news. And I like his humor. I like his the topics he covers. There's another channel called Dark 5 that he's a little bit sensational, but I really like him. Kurzgesagt, I really like. The Lockpicking Lawyer is hysterical, and I like him. Pitch Meeting. There's a sci-fi YouTuber who goes by Quinn's Ideas. He talks about a lot of sci-fi books and stuff like that. Thoughty2 is a British YouTuber who's kind of like Joe Scott. Those are some of my favorite ones that I follow. I get excited whenever those people upload.
The only overlap is Kurzgesagt. I do like Kurzgesagt. I don't watch very much YouTube, but when I do, it's in my RSS feed. My highlights are Dr. Mike, Judge Judy, Kurzgesagt, lately MKBHD.
I feel like I've heard of that one, but I haven't watched it.
You just might have heard of one of the most popular tech channels on YouTube.
Okay, that's probably where I've heard of it.
And then Veritasium.
Oh, yeah,
Pretty
he's
much
great.
it.
He stopped posting for a long time, and that's why I stopped following him. Is he active again?
His new stuff's really good. He's been active for a while now, like at least a couple of years.
I will resubscribe then.
And his new stuff's really good. It's a commitment, though. Most of his videos are over 30 minutes at this point.
Yeah, I remember back in the day, they were like 20 or 30-minute videos for sure. But they're so good, though.
Yeah, but they're good. Next question is from David Johnson. Do you guys think recent advances in deepfake technologies can be a benefit to the privacy community against surveillance capitalism? And then they pretty much mention here, the solution to combat traffic analysis has been to transmit a constant stream of encrypted junk. So can we pretty much use deepfake types of AI to offer a path to more cost-effective ways to improve privacy? They also mentioned misinformation measures recommended in the privacy community. I feel like it's really hard. There's less established things than AI that are still debated between experts. So for something like fingerprinting, for example, we see two general camps, which is fingerprint randomization and fingerprint anonymization, one of which just throws random gibberish every website you go on, so it's hard for websites to know it's you every time, but ultimately you're still unique on each site. And then the other approach is to make everyone's fingerprint look the same. And where I'm going with this is even something like this is just not very well agreed upon, how to approach this issue. We don't actually have very much research or evidence to show what works and what doesn't work when it comes to trying to fake any of these algorithms. A lot of these algorithms, we don't even have access to the source code. A lot of them are kept very private. We don't know how they work, and we don't know what's going on the company side of things. So it's really hard for us to, I guess, trick things and even know if it's effective. So I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just going to take a while, I think, for this to ever be a thing, if it is a thing. And this is all just speculation, and it's probably a better question for someone who's more familiar with AI than I am.
I don't think this would work. And I cite two reasons. Number one, you mentioned things that fake this data. From what I've seen, the large consensus is that most of it doesn't work. The two things that spring to mind are ad nauseum. I don't know if you guys remember that. I want to say it's a fork of uBlock Origin. It's an ad blocker, but in addition to blocking the ads, it also clicks on every single one of them. And the idea is that by clicking on all the ads, number one, it will trick the data brokers. It'll throw the noise in there, like what you're talking about. It's just noise that'll make it harder for you to be picked out. And number two, it'll cost the advertisers money. Every actual analysis I've seen about that plugin is that it doesn't actually work. It's more of an art project or like a statement. Targeted advertising and surveillance capitalism is so ridiculously good. It doesn't even care. It just bounces that stuff right off. It's like, yeah, whatever. I still know you. I still know what you're clicking. My conclusion is this whole idea of adding noise, unless it's done in a very specific way by actual experts, like no offense to the people who made those extensions. I'm sure you did your best and you definitely know more than me. I'm not trying to throw shade, but unless they're made by like Molvad, or like I mentioned in that same episode, like Signal, unless they're made by actual experts, I just don't think they're that good. If there were something like this, it would have to be made by a team of people who are like the godfathers of AI. Like, we know this shit in and out, in our sleep, left and right, sideways, up, down, everything you could ever want to know about AI, we know it. Number two is the cat and mouse game. Let's say hypothetically, a bunch of AI experts came together and made this thing. How long will it take before, and ironically, it'll probably use AI, the surveillance capitalism people roll out this other tool that uses AI to parse through the noise and figure out what traffic is legitimate? I just feel like it would be an arms race of like, we'd roll out this deepfake thing, they'd roll out a way to combat it, we'd roll out a new improvement, which, I mean, to be fair, is the entire privacy struggle to begin with. But I don't know. I mean, it's certainly an interesting idea. I had never thought about that before, and I think it's a really cool concept. But just in general, I'm not sure it would be like feasibly possible. I would love to be wrong, because anything we can do to make the disinformation process easier for people. Because you're right, it does take some work and some thought. If we could simplify that into an app that does this for you, I think that would be amazing. But I feel like it's not feasible. And our last question comes from Encrypted Eagle. Hey guys, I'm generally an anti-meta type of guy. I don't use WhatsApp, I don't have a Facebook account, etc. However, I recently purchased a Quest 3 as I enjoy virtual reality and MR. I don't know what MR is. Anyways, gaming and apps, and it seems to be the best hardware for the price. However, to use Quest, it requires a Meta account, which I did use a burner account for. I understand using something like this sucks for privacy, and I would like to limit what data and telemetry Meta is collecting. I plan to run my current VPN on the router so that I can mask my IP address, but I could also use something like NextDNS or Pi-hole alongside my VPN to mitigate could I also use something like NextDNS or Pi-hole along my VPN to mitigate some of Meta's telemetry? I have no experience using DNS services and would love to hear if you have advice or recommendations. I use Proton VPN on our router. My wife really likes streaming services like Netflix, Disney Plus, Crunchyroll, and Proton is the only one that promises like, yes, we will work with those streaming services. And the first time I fired it up, it wasn't working. And it's because I was trying to use, I think, AdGuard, because I was trying to block as many ads as possible while also using the VPN. And basically, it was causing a DNS leak. I had to use Proton's DNS. It really depends on your setup. I'm told from a lot of you guys in the comments, actually, there should be a way to use a Pi-hole, for example, with, like, for me personally, for my setup, I should also be able to use a Pi-hole. You might experience some DNS leaks. And basically, when there's a DNS leak, as far as usage is concerned, like the end user experience, the service knows it. So that was what was causing issues for us, is because they saw a DNS leak, they kind of figured out that we were using a VPN, and they're like, hey, you can't do that. And then once we switched to Proton's DNS and everything was Proton, no problems. So you might run into that same issue. With Proton specifically, if you're on the right plan, they do also offer NetShield, which filters out like ads, trackers, malware, stuff like that. And we do have that enabled on the router. It might take some research to get the exact desired result you want.
My experience doesn't really tie much into this because I don't actually know. I've never even used a VR headset. My assumption is that there might be a couple telemetry domains, but you don't even need to use a custom DNS for that. I assume this is mostly going to be at home. So you could probably just block those domains on your router if you have that capability, if you could just see your network traffic. Also, a lot of their telemetry might actually be going through actually valid domains. That's something that like YouTube does. That's why you can't just use DNS to block YouTube ads, because it's combined with other domains that they use to give you the video. That's why you normally want to combine DNS like ad blocking with browser ad blocking, because they're going to cover different things and different bases. So I don't think it's going to harm you to be able to use something like a DNS provider that's going to block some stuff. Maybe you'll actually be able to block a couple telemetry domains, but ultimately, yeah, you're logged into your Facebook account on a Facebook product. That doesn't really have much configuration built in, is my guess, to like install things to make it more privacy friendly. So I think the best bet is to just keep it compartmentalized, use it for just non-sensitive tasks, and just acknowledge that there's a bit of risk involved with the workflow that you're going for.
One quick thing that occurred to me while you were talking, that could also be something, is you could set up like an IoT network that's firewalled off from everything else, and you could run this on there.
And that's all we have for the Q&A this week. So staying religiously updated versus the risks. Can deepfakes be used to benefit privacy, using DNS to combat Meta, and our favorite YouTube channels? Again, thank you for tuning in and asking questions. We really appreciate it, and we really support everyone who's giving us some money over on Patreon. It really does help us out, and it allows us to keep this podcast free for everybody. And you can join our next Q&A already, right now, by joining us at patreon.com/surveillancepod on Patreon. See you soon.